Welcome to the Electric Wire Podcast. We bring you news and views on the most pressing issues facing Wisconsin's electric industry, from policymakers, executives, and customer and environmental advocates. Bringing you these discussions, we are the Customers First Coalition. Here's your host, Executive Director Kristin Gilkes.
Welcome back, listeners, to the Electric Wire. I am Kristin Gilkes, and for this episode, I'm pleased to welcome Andy Bochman of the Idaho National Lab, as well as Bob Stone of the IBEW 2150. Andy Bochman is the Senior Grid Strategist for the Idaho National Laboratory's National and Homeland Security Directorate. In this role, Mr. Bochman provides strategic guidance on topics at the intersection of grid security and resilience to INL leadership, as well as senior U.S. and international government and industry leaders. Bob Stone is a business manager for the IBEW 2150. He's also a board member of the Customers First Coalition. In this episode, we'll talk about the cleaner energy future while preserving jobs, strengthening communities, and providing affordable and reliable power. I'll turn you over now to my conversation here in Madison with Andy and Bob. How are you guys doing today?
Doing great, Kristin.
Yep, great to be with you.
Thank you for joining. Bob is a representative of the IBEW 2150. He is a board member of the Customers First Coalition, and he joins us for the second time on the podcast today. So thanks for returning, Bob. And Andy works for Idaho National Lab. And Andy, for those listeners who don't know what Idaho National Lab is, can you please tell us where you work and what you do there?
Yeah, sure thing, Kristin. It's kind of weird, right, that I'm from Idaho National Lab, but here I am recording this podcast in Madison after about a 1 hour drive from Milwaukee, which is my new home a couple of years ago. Anyway, they let some employees like me live wherever. And so here I am in the upper Midwest, originally from Boston, just so you know, go Celtics. The Idaho National Lab is one of 17 national labs in the Department of Energy's complex. Each installation is full of scientists and engineers, and the mission is to solve the most challenging, most difficult problems facing the nation and our friends around the world. If it's a problem that can be tackled successfully commercially, if there's a profit to be made by solving this problem, then that's not our ground. Our ground is to do things that are further in the future or more difficult or more dangerous. For example, the Idaho National Lab is a nuclear energy laboratory. They've developed 52 test reactors over the last several decades. Some of them they've driven to failure. It's in a fairly isolated part of the country, a lot of jackrabbits, and not as many people as, say, the Fermi lab in Argonne in Chicago. So we solved those problems and are designing new nuclear reactors, small modular reactors, and micro reactors that may be and hopefully will be the future of nuclear power in the United States and elsewhere.
Andy, we recently spoke with Dairyland Power Cooperative's president and CEO, Brent, who gave us an update on their talks with NuScale in order to explore the potential future use of small modular reactor nuclear technology. How does Idaho National Lab help facilitate the incorporation of new technologies like this?
Sure. The lab, some of my colleagues there are collaborating with NuScale, TerraPower, and other young companies getting into the space, as well as with some of the older guard nuclear power firms. They're working on refining the designs of these new approaches. They generally have passive safety designs, safety architectures, so that, say with Fukushima, part of the problem was that the safety systems needed electricity too. And when the water flooded their plant, some of those electric sources went down, and so the safety systems wouldn't work. And that's why you got the meltdown type stuff that happened there. In a passive system, it's more like gravity is all you need. And as long as gravity doesn't go away, you should be able to fail with high confidence in a safe condition. So working out things like that, working out the economics. One key detail with small modular reactors and micro reactors is I think they're motivated in part by Elon Musk and his gigafactories for the Tesla cars and other stuff. the economies of scale all the way back to Henry Ford, that up until now, most nuclear power plants, including ones in the Southeast United States, which have, I think, run into the maybe $20 billion now of in total costs, it's clearly not a great money-making venture, and it's not good for customers either, right? When it gets, the overruns reach that point. Here, if we can build these designs with economies of scale, mass production in factories, we should be able to get rid of lots of the extra costs from these more bespoke approaches and bring them down. I don't know if it's ever going to be as cost effective as the cheapest gas plants now or the cheapest wind and solar, but it's going to be a hell of a lot. It seems like, I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver, but it seems like it's going to be way better economics for these new designs and way better safety too than it has been in the past.
Excellent. Thank you. Andy, can you tell us more about what you see as the coal to cleaner energy transition? What does cleaner energy mean to you in that transition?
The first thing you want to do if you're trying to reduce CO2 and methane emissions and other pollutants too is shut down coal plants. I don't mean to sound like an anti-coal person. I'm just saying that's the most highest polluting, most greenhouse gas contributing way that we generate electricity in the country today. I'm not sure, maybe when we do oil peakers, they can give them a run for the money. I'm not sure about that. But it's the first thing you would shut down. And it seems also like for the past several years, if not decade or so, that there's been a lot of downward pressure on coal. Part of the issue with having a new nuclear power plant, new design plant, or the old ones too, is siting. Everybody knows in infrastructure that siting is the toughest thing, permitting, right? So one day I woke up, I thought I was all brilliant having this great idea. This wasn't that long ago either, so I'm still pretty fresh, and thought, I know what we should do. As we shut coal plants down, that's where we should put these new design nuclear plants, advanced nuclear, small modular reactor, et cetera. It kills so many birds with one stone. We already have a place that's sited for the generation of electricity. Most importantly, it's at a termination point for transmission lines, another thing that's impossible to site. But anyway, they go right up to the plant. Isn't that fantastic? We'll have to change out some of the transformers, maybe all of them in the substation, but that's small potatoes, Idaho pun, when you think about what it would be like to try to put a new nuclear plant or new anything in a greenfield situation. So that was my idea. Wow, great, coal to nuclear, let's do that. But of course, that wasn't my idea. It just felt like it. Perhaps you've had that feeling yourself.
That was my idea.
See, I think almost everybody at some point has this idea, but it's been in the works for some time. And a little bit of Googling will reveal to you that, yes, people have been thinking about this. And from what I understand, the first one that's farthest along that will happen in our country is in a place called Kemmerer, Wyoming. Wyoming's a place that's been heavily dependent, and the economy is still heavily dependent on coal mining. And so they've realized with some foresight that they're going to have to be a little more nimble than other parts of the country if they're going to keep their economy afloat as coal goes out of fashion. I don't know if that's the main reason. I haven't been to Kemmerer and spoken with either the utility people there or say the local government folks or the senators or reps, but I have a sense that they're extra motivated to move out early, especially as I was joking with Bob earlier, my experience with utilities, which does go back a couple decades, is they're not the most forward-leaning, let's see, what's the opposite of risk averse, like risk tolerant? And for good reason, it's the business. It's not one where you want to take a lot of risks. Nevertheless, I do look for exemplars, people who for some reason moved out early and took on that risk of exploring new territory. It seems like in Kemmerer, that's what they're doing. And who knows, but we might go visit them with some possible applications for Wisconsin in mind.
Thank you. And Bob, do you want to talk a little bit about your perspective on the coal to cleaner energy transition as well?
So that's a subject that brought Andy and I together, actually. Even when he just said the first thing you want to do is shut down a coal-fired plant, it kind of raised my hackles a little bit to this day because, as you know, I represent a lot of people that work in those facilities. I worked in a coal-fired plant myself in Oak Creek, and as the business manager of Local 2150, it's my job keep my eyes open for that. And so it's a devastating thing to shut down a plant like that, but it's not just devastating to the employees, it's devastating to the community, the tax base. And so this whole theory of bringing in a small modular nuclear reactor onto an old coal-fired site really is interesting to me, not just for the jobs, but for the community and not leaving them high and dry. And so that's why I'm all in and eyes wide open, and I'll do what I can to keep moving this along and this subject along.
I think that's true. So some of the benefits are keeping the same location, using the existing transmission infrastructure, having access to a qualified workforce in the area, and then keeping those tax benefits flowing to the community.
Absolutely. It's all part of that just transition that we talked about the last time we did the podcast. And this is a perfect piece of it. And I am very hopeful that in time, the technology will develop.
One of the first things Bob and I talked about, is, of course, where we have common ground is on the jobs front. And we postulated that someplace in Wisconsin, there's a coal plant that is either shuttered or set to be retired sometime soon. And there are folks, part of the energy transition movement, which I am one, who are thinking, okay, wind, solar, and storage. It's economical, and it's in keeping with the times that we're in, right? And we started to say, well, we sort of tabletop that. Well, what would that be like? All right. Well, first of all, the wind turbines and the solar panels and storage farm couldn't be in the same place that the coal plant was. So we didn't get any gain of the previous permitting that was already in place, right? We have to go find new places and fight those battles, win those arguments. That's time and money and money. And let's assume we're successful at some point. And we're trying to, we're trying to build a comparable amount of megawatt capacity, which then, sidebar, that's not dispatchable. So that's why we need the storage, but storage isn't fully ready yet to take on that thing. So in a sense, it's not apples to apples, it's apples to oranges. The thing we're replacing the coal plant with, from a grid stability, reliability, services point of view, is not the same thing. It's a lesser thing, and that's going to need to be compensated for in some other way. So now we go out into the fields. We must assume they're fields, right? We're not going to put the new wind and solar in downtown Milwaukee, Madison, or Green Bay. So we're going to find some fields and put these things in, many, many acres. And there are going to be some jobs for sure that are construction jobs for building out these assets. And I don't know what the number of employees is, but chances are it's probably almost none of the people that were a part of the coal team that were being replaced, right? So anyway, some short-term, maybe decent paying jobs are generated in this project. However, once it's built, up and run and commissioned, it may be 10 people, it may be 5. Let's be open-minded. Maybe it's 20 people that are charged with monitoring, operating, and maintaining these new facilities. That ain't nothing like the 100 or 150 people that were running and maintaining, operating the coal plant. And the types of jobs are completely different, and they're a different place. Basically, that's too many words to say all of those coal plant jobs supporting that town are gone. And there's nothing comparable being created somewhere else, either in terms of jobs or in terms of grid services from the new things. In terms of replacing the coal plant with small modular reactor on or near the same site, a company named NewScale has created a lovely white paper. We'll include it in the show notes, maybe, Kristin will.
Yes, we will.
Where they show you, they take an abstract coal plant and give you the 15 or 20 different job categories and how many people in each category are part of that coal plant operation. And then they show you the small modular reactor of roughly similar capacity. Let's say it's a 700 megawatt coal plant. We daisy chain 12 60 megawatt modular reactors, and we get 720. And it's almost all of the jobs, I think all of the jobs from the coal plant transfer over, some with no retraining, some with some training, And now they're working at the small modular reactor, the new nuclear plant. And because it's nuclear energy, of course, we're going to have additional safety precautions. So I think there's another 10 or 20 people that are just security folks. I said safety, but I really, in this case, meant security type of jobs to make sure that that place is really safe and secure. So it's really a net gain for the local economy. It's a net gain for the grid. It's a net gain for the planet in terms of climate, because now we're talking about a clean base load, replacing the carbon base load that was there before. And one last point, this isn't meant to be set up as a nuclear versus renewables argument. One thing I say to people is that if you have that clean base load in a climate context, now you can go crazy with renewables. The new nuclear designs are, from what I understand, fairly good and may get better at load following. So as wind ebbs and flows and solar does the same and storage does the best it can leveling it off, the small modular reactors will be able to keep up with that. And you can really have, I think, you can maybe realize the dream of a complete carbon-free generation source with wind, solar storage, nuclear at the base load, some hydro as the base load, depending on what part of the country you're in. Who knows, maybe some geothermal is going to get added as well.
Can we talk a little bit about reliability and the importance of nuclear in a reliable energy portfolio, especially in these upcoming summer months?
Yeah, NERC recently came out with, we're recording this on the first day of June, but last week NERC came out with what they call their summer reliability assessments. I think it was last week. And they said, they showed a map. You can look this up as well.
We'll put this in the show notes too.
That said, there's two parts of the country that are of concern, and they're not little parts. It's the entire West is colored orange, and they're thinking about the heat waves, heat domes, wildfires that have afflicted California, Texas. We've seen some really strange heat coming out this spring already. And so how are things going to hold up in that context? You know, one of the sayings of the climate resilience crew is that the infrastructure of today, the infrastructure we have is built for a previous century. It's not built for this century. And that this century is starting out as nothing like last century. So, so the West has problems. Now, I was going to say Idaho. Idaho has issues with that, but Wisconsin isn't included there. The problem with Wisconsin is potentially even worse, however. It was much to my surprise, having moved here recently, and that is that NERC is identifying the MISO region in red for two reasons, and hopefully I'm translating these with some accuracy. One is that a piece of transmission, I think it's a 5-mile stretch, was wiped out in a tornado last December, and that part has yet to be repaired, and it connects north to south. So in the spirit of when one part of the grid's having trouble, it can get help from some other part because it's so massively networked. Well, this is a major part of the network that's down. And until that's repaired, that's giving them a lot of concern out at NERC. The second part is, and this is more of a general category, that apparently the state has shuttered more plants than it's brought on, and it's showing a deficit. You always want to have a comfortable margin of capacity above what your highest predicted summer usage will be. And it seems like in MISO, it's shy by quite a bit. And until something is done, either to reduce demand or increase how much we can generate or borrow, we've put ourselves way too close to the edge. When I say we, I'm speaking generally or generically. There's a lot of people who have a role in this, and there's no one person that gets to say. But it sure seems like we all need to come together. Everybody in this community needs to come together and make some decisions with reliability at the top of the list as a goal.
Let's talk a little bit more about grid resilience in the face of a changing climate. What do we need to do to prepare the grid to be the most resilient that it can be?
The infrastructure that we depend on is built for the conditions of a different century, the 20th century. And what we're seeing now in climate change, often going by the name of global warming, for those people who chafe at that term as political, I offer up global weirding. The fact that things are happening in places where they never used to happen. They're happening with more intensity, they're happening with more frequency, and just they're extreme weather events. That's the term of art that allows you to get past anything political. No one is denying that in certain places, there's enormous new pressure on electric, oil, natural gas, water and wastewater, transportation and communication systems that wasn't there before. It's not part of the planning process, the integrated resource planning process that we've used up until this moment, looking back at 500-year floods and 1,000-year storms. Those terms, which we've used to help us understand likelihood and probability, and therefore the strength with which we need to design our systems, those are now obsolete. Not everybody will agree with that, but what the heck? That's what it seems like to me, especially when Houston had 3 500-year floods in as many years, in 3 years, a couple years ago. So what's the meaning of a 500-year flood in that context? I would argue that the best resource we have now for understanding what's with us now and what's coming at us are the global climate models that are developed and maintained at some of the sister national labs to mine, places like Argonne in Chicago, Berkeley in California, NOAA, and the one in Boulder, NCAR, National Center for Atmospheric Research, which we team with. Those folks, they're not going to say that they're 100% accurate or confident, but what they show is coming at a particular town, a particular energy or water asset in 5, 10, 25 years is our best source of information. And depending where you are geographically in the country, that could be too much heat or too little heat. See Texas, February 2021. Too much water, the flooding, sea level rise, these catastrophic downpours, or too little water, the droughts that are affecting our ability to use fossil plants because they need the water for cooling and to generate steam. So too much and too little of things that used to be more stable. And if you're near a large body of water, like an ocean, for example, or a river, now you have to think more about the incremental sea level rise effects, which are indisputable. And they vary depending where in the world you are and where in the country you are. But you have to plan for these things now in ways you never did before. That's going to mean building, let's say, electric infrastructure and hardening it in ways that you didn't do before. And for existing infrastructure, prioritizing by consequence what needs to be protected first and best. What substation can you not afford to lose because it is so important to a given city or a military base, to public health, for example, that you're going to have to do something if you want to keep that thing viable for its projected lifetime, whether that's the next 10 years, the next 30 years. Got to look long and hard at those things and start making the plans now to make that system, that substation in the abstract, more resilient. And I'll use the term hardening loosely because sometimes I don't mean ballistically hardening, although sometimes you do. Sometimes you mean raising it or undergrounding it, or if there's just no amount of, or building a wall around it, or if engineers tell you that it's just way too much money to keep that thing alive. It's time to move that function. That's the adaptation part, adapting the function to be produced, to be fulfilled somewhere else in a better, safer, more environmentally stable location.
So do you have thoughts on who should be responsible for hardening the grid and how much we should be reasonably paying to do that?
I guess the first part of that answer would be, how much is electric reliability worth? Can you place a dollar value on it? Like a lingua franca that we can all agree that keeping the lights on 99.9% or whatever is our target time, that may shift, is worth a certain amount of money, paid either or in part by consumers and supplemented by other funds from other places, including government funds. Because that's that's where these arguments, that's the point that these arguments will push and pull on. We want to give folks the lowest possible rates for affordable, safe, and reliable electricity. But in order to have the reliable part, we're going to have to invest some more money this century. I mean, more than just the usual amount of keeping things up. Everybody's used to rates going up little piece by little piece. This may be something different than that. And I don't know if we have a consensus yet, or if we'll ever reach a consensus about what's the right amount of resilience expenditure to make to help folks, because we're both hurting and helping people at the same time. When we spend to make something more resilient, to keep the lights on, which is a big plus, we're also spending more money. If we go the other way, maybe we could do logical extremes. We don't make anything more resilient, even despite what we see coming at us in the models. That way we hold rates down. Except what do you get for that? You get longer and longer, more sustained blackouts. What's the economic cost, and what's the equity cost for tough communities who are traditionally hit hardest by these blackouts and browns? What is it? All right, I'm stumbling over my words. There's more work to be done in this area to try to figure out these competing value systems, how to balance them out in the best way. And when I say equitable here, I mean environmental justice equitable, but I also mean all the economic and governmental interests that are part of this. How can it all be balanced out in a way for maximum? What's the least bad way to do this?
Right.
If you look at ERCOT, an unregulated market, and when profit is the driving force, and you can take some additional risks, and sometimes you take too many risks, and you end up with what we saw in February of 2021, I believe that was, right?
Yes, which was almost a perfect replay of February 2011, which is almost a replay of December 1989. This is a place where, you're familiar with the term lessons learned, and you have a report and then you do something about it. This is a place where these are lessons unlearned. And now we've had, somewhere between 200 and 600 people died for various causes during that freeze, and tens of billions of dollars of economic costs. And it remains to be seen whether that's enough this time to motivate ERCOT or the people that have influence over ERCOT to say it's time to do something different.
And I'm not an expert by any stretch on this, but I do know that utilities are hardening their systems at the rate maybe not that we'd like them to, at the cost and the expense that we maybe don't think they maybe should invest more. But Andy talked about undergrounding, and that's one way that utilities do that on their transmission and distribution. But what I wanted to say, and maybe I'm biased, is we kind of, in this area, especially in this state, we've got a very reliable system, and compared to a lot of places in the country. And that's kind of driving to your question, is how much are they spending in those other areas where the power outages are more frequent? So.
I think that's a really good point. And the utilities reliability is actually regulated by the Public Service Commission of Wisconsin. They're called SAIDI and SAFE standards. The utilities have to make sure that any given customer is not facing outages for more than a certain number of hours per month or annually, and they are reviewed based on those standards. So
by the PSC.
Correct.
But I can tell you, the employers that I deal with, the utility employers, those SAFE and SAIDI numbers are looked at constantly.
Yep.
And what are we doing wrong? What are we doing right? And that is a very important thing to them, which adds to the reliable system that we find ourselves in here.
So for our final question, we ask all our guests, what would you do with all the power in the industry?
Oh, I've answered this one.
Yes,
already.
you have. Yes, you have.
The last time I said I would turn it off just to wake everybody up.
I know. I loved that. That was in our highlights episode too.
But well, I would like to think that we could transition from the carbon-based generation to some non-carbon based carbon neutral generation without hurting communities, without hurting workers, and without hurting our environment. And that would be, what my goal would be. So
Thanks, Bob.
Some people have said that doing everything Bob just said all at the same time, sometimes they'll say it's walking, and can you walk and chew gum at the same time? A better, I think, way of expressing the scale of the problem is something like juggling 10,000 flaming discs at the same time. It's a problem that's that complex and has that many hazards that you're trying to manage all at the same time. I want the same things Bob wants. I think anybody would. You can say it in different ways, but there are going to be trade-offs. This is requiring enormous compromises and spirit of open-mindedness. This is where you would expect someone to say, in our current configuration of politics in Washington and elsewhere, it's really tough to come to agreements. But there are some things that are so important that they seem to be able to transcend the typical fault lines that we line up on. And I think this is one of them. You'll find people having different opinions on what the causes of climate change are, how much the human contribution is, how much is some natural cycles or whatever. But when you get to resilience, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. Sure, you want mitigation as much as you can, and almost everything in the energy transition is about mitigation of the greenhouse gases that we're putting into the atmosphere and that are heating the air and the oceans, et cetera. But on resilience and adaptation, that's just dealing with reality. And how do you want to be? How do you want your communities to be? How do you want your country to be? Because these things are happening. That's not a place for argument. And another place for that's inarguable is that they're going to get worse. This is not one of those situations where you say, oh, it's going to get worse before it gets better. This isn't that. This is going to get worse, ... Once you accept that painful reality, if you still have it within you to defend and protect your town, your state, your country, et cetera, then you can start swinging into action right away. Because to delay is a serious mistake.
Thank you both for joining. This was a lovely discussion, and I really enjoyed it.
thank you, Kristin.
High
Thank you.
fives.
Woo! Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
Thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in. Please support our work. You can subscribe to the Electric Wire podcast if you haven't already, and you can follow us on Twitter @The Electric Wire. Thanks also to the members of the Customers First Coalition for supporting this podcast. Our members are Dairyland Power Cooperative, Madison Gas and Electric, the Municipal Electric Utilities of Wisconsin, WPPI Energy, Renew Wisconsin, the Citizens Utility Board, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers Local 2150, and the Wisconsin Electric Cooperatives Association. Thanks again for listening. We'll have a new episode next month.